There were two articles in the Sunday New York Times just before Christmas that caught my attention. One was written by David Brooks, a regular columnist, well known to Times readers. I inevitably read his columns and usually think he's got some intriguing things to say. The other article, well, it was written by a guest columnist, an unusual one, Pope Francis. The title of the Pope's article was, "There is Faith in Humor." It was an essay extracted from a forthcoming autobiography. The Pope notes the inevitability of sadness as part of every path of hope and the importance of not wallowing in melancholy. The Pope references a story in the Gospel which reminds us about our ability to smile. Today's Gospel reading also reminds us of a humorous moment, which I'll come to in a couple of minutes. But first, the Pope had a Pope joke in the article that amused me, and I hope it does you. The Pope arrives at the airport in New York for his apostolic journey in the United States. Pope Francis finds an enormous limousine waiting for him. He's rather embarrassed by this magnificent splendor. But then he thinks, well, it's been ages since he last drove and never a vehicle of that kind. So he thinks to himself, when might I get another chance? He looks at the limousine and then he looks at the driver and he says to the driver, "You couldn't let me try it out, could you?" "Look, I'm really sorry, Your Holiness," replies the driver, "but I can't really. There are rules and regulations." But you know what they say, when the Pope has got something in his head, he's got it in his head. And so he insists and he insists until the driver gives in. So Pope Francis gets behind the steering wheel and he's out on one of those enormous highways and he really begins to enjoy it. He's pressing down on the accelerator and he's going 50 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour, 120 miles an hour. And you guessed it, until he hears the siren and a police car pulls up beside him and stops him. A young policeman comes up to the darkened window. The Pope rather nervously lowers it, and the policeman turns white. "Excuse me a moment," he says, and he goes back to his vehicle to call headquarters. "Boss, I think I've got a problem." "What problem?" asks the chief. "Well, I've stopped a guy for speeding, but there's a guy in there who's really important." "How important? Is he the mayor?" No, more than the mayor. "More than the mayor? Who is there? The governor?" No, more. Well, it can't be the president." "More, I reckon." "Well, who can be more important than the president?" "Look, boss, I don't know exactly who it is. All I can tell you is that it's the Pope who is driving him." It's a gentle, funny story, but most importantly for me, Pope Francis had it published in a major paper. Now, why? What was the Pope trying to convey? I think one of his points is that faith is a human journey in all aspects. Yes, we frequently focus on hardship and sadness and suffering and discrimination and the need for social justice, and all for good reason. But humanity is more than that. It's joy, it's humor, it's a wry, deprecating joke, it's love, including love that's displayed physically. It's the gentle joshing and good spirits that goes on in the kitchen and out in the serving area during the community meal among all the volunteers and the guests. A universal human story appears in the Bible reading this week. We should, and I think we can appreciate it for its humor as well as for the miraculous presence of Jesus in human form. Now, it's one of the most well-known biblical stories, the miracle of water turned into wine. The setting is Cana, a tiny little village in Galilee. Jesus and his mother Mary, well, they're there. Now, some commentators speculate that the reason Mary was there is that this was the wedding of Jesus' brother James. So perhaps Mary's there in the role as mother of the groom. Perhaps Jesus is the best man and the disciples are the groomsmen. Like in some weddings, I know there are a lot of attendants, so 12 might be okay. Weddings were known to be big parties in first century Galilee. You invite the whole village. The wedding lasts for a week, and there's plenty of drinking and partying. It is a celebration. So, when the wine ran out, perhaps because the bride and groom were not that well off, it was a big deal, like embarrassing. Proper hospitality was no longer being extended, hospitality being a real point of honor in this context. So Mary says to Jesus as the older brother, who even then seemed to have some evident special talents, "Dear, we're out of wine." Jesus responds, "Not my problem. You should have hired a better wedding planner." Well, I admit that's my loose interpretation. The quote is, "Woman, what concern is that of me and to you? My hour has not yet come." Well, you can imagine a mildly exasperated Mary rolling up her eyeballs and thinking, "Sons, seriously, couldn't you just be a little more helpful?" Then thinking, well, there's no point in nagging Jesus. He usually comes around and does the right thing, so best to leave him. So she walks off after telling the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to do." As I've previously said, Mary is a woman with chutzpah. So, with mom out of the way, Jesus rolls into action, and this is not a big crowd watching this first miracles. It's servants and the disciples. The results are impressive. 6 huge stone water jars turned into wine. Jesus really outdid himself. This was Galilee year 29, a very fine vintage. Note that this is the first miracle in John is an ordinary domestic family scene. A party, good times, happiness. There would be dancing and music and laughter. The other miracles that we read about in the Gospels, the other signs in John involve people who were blind, dead, filled with demons. But this story in Cana has all the aspects of a good sitcom, human, easily understandable by us. We have a daughter getting married later this year. I looked at the checklist. Yep, make sure there's enough wine. Sermons are fundamentally about faith, at least an aspect of it, one way or another, of preaching the good news of Jesus Christ and of our own encounters with Christ. The wedding at Cana is evidence that these encounters, well, they don't always need to be solemn. We need not be in suffering or in grief to encounter the Spirit. God is with us in laughter and in joy, in bad jokes and puns like the one I told the choir earlier, and great food and lively music. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, also part of today's lectionary, speaks of the fact that we are well equipped by the Spirit for this faith journey. For some, it's the ability to tell a good story, maybe a joke. For others, well, they're still discerning their gifts. And church gives us that opportunity to meet in small groups and figure out what the nature of our own gifts are. This could be, in my case, a process of elimination. The knitting group might tell you that I know how to knit technically, but really I have no gift for it, although there is some admiration for my persistence. We all figure out what our gifts are one way or another. Paul speaks of the variety of gifts in his letter to the people of Corinth. We see a diverse population in many respects. Our perspectives, our political views, our resources, our skills, our contexts, they all vary considerably. But Paul notes that to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. This diversity of gifts and of approaches and different journeys, well, they all collectively strengthen our common humanity. What we have in common, we are all human, imperfect. Sometimes we're happy, or we're tired, we're frustrated, confused, or just need a cold beer if it wasn't dry January and someone to talk to. I appreciated the second article in the New York Times that day because David Brooks told us his faith story. Now, this isn't a faith leader preaching, it's just a well-read, articulate guy giving us his insight. It was candid, with some wry humor and some moments of beauty and transcendence. And sometimes his journey, well, it just stopped for a while. It wasn't always directionally positive. Sometimes it went sideways. Looking back in hindsight, Brooks could see that over the last 11 years, he had advanced in a better understanding of his journey and how he was changing as a person, becoming intentional towards this concept of faith. His story, like each of ours, is unique. He explained that the start of the journey, he was religious, but not spiritual. He was born Jewish, and then he was agnostic, while continuing many of the traditions of Judaism, including raising his children as Jewish. He discovered aspects of his Christianity, first at a Christian camp as a teenager and later as an adult. Now he identifies as Christian while also retaining aspects of his Judaism. His journey is unique. Each of our journeys is unique, and no one journey is better, more powerful, more religious than another. As humanity makes us diverse, so does our approach to faith. I appreciated Brooks' emphasis on faith as a journey, as a verb, as action. Faith is not necessarily a noun, suggesting boundaries, suggesting a static set of rules of right and wrong ways to be faithful. Brooks quotes from the American poet Christian Wyman, who says in his book, My Bright Abyss, faith is nothing more, but how much is this, than a motion of the soul towards God. A motion of the soul towards God. This approach of faith as a motion, as action, appeals to Brooks, who did not find faith intellectually. For him, it arrived on tiptoe, nothing momentous. Scattered moments of awe and wonder. Brooks at dawn at the foot of a mountain at the cathedral at Chartres, looking at the image of a universe or an ultrasound photo of a baby in a womb. These experiences didn't answer questions, but raised questions. They opened wider dimensions and vaster mysteries. These experiences multiplied in intensity for him over the 11 years, leaving him with feelings of transcendent joy, a longing for more, a moral goodness, a universal goodness made itself known to him. He observes that it was like moving towards God without directly encountering God. Brooks likened it to an inspiration rather than a conversion. I am grateful for Brooks for his detailed explanation of his faith journey. It's closer to mine. Raised as a United Church from childhood, mine has been a gradual, indirect by times, movement towards more questions, for realizing that most questions will remain unanswered, and to be satisfied with that. To appreciate the scattered moments of awe and to understand how important the encounters with the face of God in others moves me to deeper connection to God. Brooks stated that his most surprising observation was that faith is the wrong word for faith as he experienced it, because it suggests or implies possession of something. Let's stop and ponder that for a moment. Someone asks you, do you have faith? The question seems to require a yes or no answer. It puts us on the spot. What if I can't say yes? I don't feel confident in that answer. What are the consequences? I don't believe that the intent of our faith journey is to stress us, to be binary, to force us to be absolute in our beliefs. Brooks notes that for him, faith is a yearning for something beautiful but not fully grasped. It's more about longing and thirsting than knowing and possessing. For me, faith is a lifetime activity, sometimes with gains and insights, beautiful transcendent experiences, and sometimes I'm just not open to those. Perhaps I miss them. I get distracted. I'm human, with foibles and weaknesses, emotions and hopes and fears. But I take comfort that I, like Brooks, believe that there will never be a test as to whether I have faith or not. It's a process. Faith is a verb, an action. As Paul's letter to the people of Corinth points out, we are diverse and have been offered a diversity of gifts. Each of our faith journeys will reflect this diversity. When we leave this service today, each of us will experience a variety of different responses of what we have felt and what we've heard. No one reaction is right or wrong. No one experience is better than another's. We might have made a connection through an anthem, a prayer, a child walking forward, a conversation with the person in the pew in front of us, or with the person we're watching with at home. Let us revel in our humanity, in the strength and the diversity of the human spirit, in our joy and in our humor, in our celebration of being alive. Let us find hope that there is a place for each and every one of us in God's world on this strange and wonderful, powerful and beautiful journey that we call faith. Amen.